You've been listening live to U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg speaking at the White House in Washington, actually just a little bit earlier, not live there. But just to recap a bit of what he was saying about, of course, the event in Baltimore yesterday where that ship struck that bridge, causing it to collapse. He touched on the human impact, the 6 people who did lose their lives and a 7th that was badly injured, he mentioned. He also was covering a lot of the economic impact there. So talking about their priorities being reopening the port, no timeline on that at this point, though, dealing with the supply chain implications by water because of the ships that are coming in and out of that port. Rebuilding the bridge, again, no timeline there. He did mention how the previous bridge did take 5 years to build, but not saying that that would be the case in this particular instance. Also talking about dealing with land transportation implications. So all of the trucks that would be crossing over that bridge on a day-to-day basis not being able to do so. So how are they being rerouted from here? He touched on the local economic impact as well, saying that 8,000 jobs are tied to the port there. So a big connection there locally. It's also an important port for imports and exports. So a global reach there potentially. We're going to dig into that in just a couple of minutes here. But just on the situation in terms of what we know about how the investigation is proceeding, we know that investigators from the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, they have recovered the black box data recorder, so they'll be mining that for information, though the NTSB chair says that it is going to take some time, that they could be on the scene for 5 to 10 days. And as you heard there as well, in terms of the challenges of dealing with the cleanup and the parts of the bridge that have collapsed right on top of that ship, how challenging that could be to be able to remove those parts of the bridge and deal with the situation there and all of the containers that remain on that ship at this time. So still lots to cover on the scene there, but let's zoom out a little bit and take a look at how these supply chain disruptions could potentially have an impact beyond Baltimore, maybe here in Canada. For that, I want to bring in Barry Prentice. He's a professor of supply chain management at the University of Manitoba. Barry, thanks so much for making time for us.
My pleasure.
So when we hear supply chain issues, it might take people back to the pandemic. We heard a lot about supply chain disruptions at that time, and we know that it helped fuel inflation. So people could be on the edge of their seat here wondering, could this have a similar impact or in some way, could it have an impact on prices down the road? How far do you think the disruptions from this could be felt? Could we feel it here in Canada?
It's not impossible that some shippers and carriers could feel it. Certainly, we've integrated supply chains with the U.S., so that's not impossible. But I should remind people that I saw data that suggested that the freight from that port, 2/3 of it is regional. So Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia account for 2/3 of that freight. So there is going to be a very significant local impact for them. But towards Canada, probably be restricted to maybe Ontario and Quebec. I don't think it'll go beyond that. But nonetheless, these events remind us just how much we depend on trade and the resiliency of our system.
Yeah, it's also interconnected, isn't it? I mean, especially when you think about the automotive supply chain, and when you hear that the port in Baltimore is the busiest, the biggest in terms of volume for light trucks and cars. He also mentioned farming equipment would be in that category as well, going through that port and how important it is for that. Could there be an impact on that front when we're thinking about how integrated Canada is with the U.S. And Mexico as well when it comes to the automotive industry? Or would this potentially be more contained to perhaps imported finished product vehicles that are just coming into the U.S. market?
Well, I saw a big Mercedes parking lot there on the map, so that's one of those. Yeah, it's mainly, I think, finished cars coming in, but if our parts, and again, because the systems are so integrated, you only have to lose one small part to disrupt the supply chain. That being said, we should also bear in mind that The only problem for the port is the blocked entrance and how long it takes to remove that blockage from the shipping channel. Again, you don't have to remove the whole bridge to open the port. So I think it will probably be open maybe faster than people think. And of course, we are into a JIT or just-in-time sort of supply chains. But even with that, companies do have inventory, so they can withstand a week or so without finding a shutdown. But if it went on long enough, well, some companies maybe would be affected.
Yeah, we heard from a Buttigieg there saying that they're working to mitigate the impacts with tools that didn't exist years ago, including a new freight office that's coordinating the movements of goods in ways that didn't, pre-pandemic. Have there been developments over the past couple of years to help smooth out disruptions like this in the supply chains?
Well, perhaps the biggest thing, of course, was the new Panama Canal, which allowed more traffic to come into the east coast of the U.S. because bigger ships could get through the canal. On the other side, we have the problems in the Red Sea. And so some ships that would have come through the Red Sea to Europe and then move products over to the east coast of the U.S. and Canada, they're having to go a longer route around Africa. So there are other things out there besides just this one port that are affecting the supply chains.
So where are freight rates at this point? Could a situation like this end up pushing up prices a bit so that, maybe that is felt beyond the Baltimore area or the more regional area in terms of the actual trade impact, but maybe prices might get passed on a little bit further down the road?
Well, certainly regionally, I think it would be an impact, but beyond that, I don't think so. The freight rates are back down to almost pre-pandemic levels now. And so this event, and again, putting it in perspective, I think Baltimore moves about a million TEUs. Well, Montreal moves more than that, and Vancouver moves much more. So it's in a sense of a port. It's the 9th largest in the U.S., but it's also moving other products, sugar and agricultural products, cars, as you mentioned, oil, coal. So there's other things that are moved to the port. So some of those supply chains may be disrupted temporarily. But again, I would think that the removal of the bridge is going to happen much faster than people would expect.
TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units,
yes.
That's used to measure the volume of containers. Just very quickly, Barry, how much depends on how long this disruption lasts in terms of the impact? Do you think if they're able to clear up the damage of the bridge sooner and they're able to open the port, what are you looking at in terms of days, weeks, or months in order to manage that impact?
Well, putting it in perspective of the modes of transport, there's no impact on rail except picking things up at the port. The port itself has to have the entrance cleared and be back in. Again, I'm thinking 10 days, 2 weeks. They should be able to get that cleared up, but we'll see. The biggest impact, longer term, of course, will be the road system. And it's a congested area. And of course, that one bridge apparently is the only way to move dangerous goods across that area. So they're going to have to reroute those trucks quite a long way to do that. So, and that, of course, how long does it take to put a bridge back into action?
Right.
I think they said, 5 years is a possibility. Well, probably sooner than that now, but nonetheless, locally, this is going to have some real serious impacts, but I think they will be isolated to that area.
Okay, Barry, really appreciate your context on this. That's Barry Prentice. He's a professor of supply chain management at the University of Manitoba.